I want to talk about the fallacies that I observe in spirituality, or when it comes to self-improvement, or I think anything in life in general. Because I think what I would say is what we're talking about here, I wouldn't necessarily call spirituality, but I don't know. It's more just looking at what's happening in a way, or what's not happening, and yeah, and so yeah, some of the biggest fallacies in when it comes to let's say self-improvement or spirituality that I have observed, over the time, and where I feel like many people are stuck. And yeah, in a way, it's also maybe a development or an evolution of many of who are supposedly on this kind of path. But there are a few things that are very obvious, that the mechanism of, let's say, in which many are trapped are very obvious when we're able to be outside of that. And when people are inside those traps and mechanisms and fallacies, it's very hard for them to see, or impossible actually, because when we're in something, we are acting from something, and we can't see it because we're then looking from a very limited perspective. So yeah, I just want to point out some of them here today, because I think, there are people who, I don't know, let's say, who have been meditating for 20 years, who have been following people who, claim to be enlightened and claim to have teachings and everything. And yeah, what I observe is actually, the more someone, let's say, wants to be liberated or enlightened or anything like this, I feel like the more they're suffering in a way, maybe on a more subtle way, but it feels like there's more suffering happening when someone has heard about the idea of, oh, one day I can be enlightened, or one day I can be liberated, and I don't have to go through all those, bad things in life and everything. So anyway, I think it's worth pointing those out, because I think it can help to find some kind of relief from all this effort that people put in, effort, money, and a lot of frustration as well. I hear many people, who have heard about the idea that liberation and enlightenment is like a real thing, and they listen to so-called enlightened people, and they listen and think, one day I can be here, and I'm here right now. And then finally we try to copy things that they do, because somehow we have this idea of, let's say I want to become a millionaire. So what I do is I follow people who have made it, to become a millionaire, or who are rich, and I observe what they do, and I try to find the common pattern. And I read the book of, the 10 steps to become a millionaire. And then, hundreds of thousands of people read it. And then, I don't know, maybe some of them become millionaires, but most of them not. And it's really interesting. And that's also, we can observe in spirituality, or when it comes to understanding who we are. We're sort of trying like funny things, we're trying to see, we're looking at so supposedly enlightened or liberated people, and we copy how they speak, or what language they use, or how they dress, and we make that a thing, which, in my eyes, has nothing to do with what we're speaking about here. Liberation is not something that we, as what we take ourselves to be, can attain one day, but it's much more the case that what we're looking for is already the case right now, and so much, it's so obvious and so close to us, closer than any thought or any feeling or anything, that we don't see it. It's like a fish in the water, right? If you ask the fish in the water and say, hey, how's the water today? And the fish would be like, what water? And he's drenched in water all his life, but he wouldn't know what water is, because he doesn't know how it is without water. And that's exactly how it is for us. Like, what we are is liberated, is freedom, is joy, is love. And we don't see it because it's so obvious. Without that, like nothing would exist, because everything exists in that. And yeah, anyway, so let's go into those things. So I think the number one fallacy when it comes to spirituality or the path, I would say, is the starting point. So having a wrong starting point is, I think, the number one fallacy. What does that mean? I like to speak in analogies. So let's use the analogy of, I think it's a very common one, but I think it's very powerful, of the screen and the movie. And so just very briefly again, for those who haven't heard about it. So there's a screen and there's the movie that's happening on the screen. And so basically everything in our world, like, you know, the objects, the events that are happening, the emotions, the thoughts, everything that can be perceived is basically part of the movie. And the screen is basically formless and the movie is the form. So everything that can be perceived is happening in the movie, and what is perceived, and that's exactly where the wrong starting point happens, is we presuppose that what we are is an action figure in the movie. That's the starting point. That's what we learn. You know, we are told that we are born once, but, you know, we buy into this idea just like that. Obviously, I'm not denying that this body is born. The body is obviously born, comes out, we can witness that. But what happens is automatically we identify with this body mind, and automatically we are identified as that. So the wrong starting point means we identify with something in the movie like this right away, and that's the wrong starting point. Meaning, when we identify, or when we start from that point, it seems like an endless path or endless journey to ever reach, like to ever reach home again, which we have never left in the first place. And that's exactly it. Yeah, there's a comment which is saying Paul Hederman calls himself an action figure. Exactly, it's like that. So that's exactly where we start. So we, instead of starting in a way and realizing that we are that screen, what we do is we presuppose, without questioning at all, without examining it, we believe, it's based on beliefs, that we are this action figure. We are something in the movie, the actor, the action figure, something that can be perceived, and we identify as that. But we identify in a presupposing way, meaning we never actually question it or examine it firsthand. We just take that belief, and that's the number one fallacy in spirituality. Because, you know, let's say we start this journey, this path of spirituality. Like, let's say, you know, we saw through life and we saw that, you know, I'm not finding happiness in my job. I'm not finding, although I may have the job I always dreamt of, I don't find happiness there. I may have the best partner I could imagine. I don't find ultimate happiness in a relationship. I may have the biggest house on earth, but I'm still not happy and satisfied fully, you know? So, and then at some point, like, I think, you know, everyone who's listening here, or everyone is here, we understand, okay, it cannot be about a materialistic life. So then we go into spirituality and say, hey, how can I find happiness here? And then we realize, yeah, there's, you know, something bigger than what we're looking for. But what we usually do, all of us, usually, we start from that point that we have identified as one character in that movie. And that's exactly where it goes wrong, or in the wrong way, because based on that identification, any kind of solution we're looking for this character in the movie, it always assumes that it's not liberated. Like, we are fabricating that in every moment, like this belief that we're not liberated. That's happened. It's a fabrication. You know, it's not like that, because usually it's the other way around, right? We believe we're like this character in the movie as Benjamin, and then we're trying to look for salvation for this character in the movie, and we think we have this idea to become the screen one day, but it will never work. Benjamin, he can never leave the movie, ever. He can never become the screen. And that's the number one fallacy in spirituality. And it's like, instead of trying to say, what happens usually is we identify as this character in the movie, and we go on a journey, on a path from there. But that's too late. So any path we go on, whether this is becoming a Buddhist monk, whether this is, I don't know, meditating every day, whether this is I don't know, eating healthy food, whether this is praying, I don't know, anything from there on, even if it's the most holy rituals and practices we do, it will always happen that this character in this movie will take it for himself or herself. And that's exactly the challenge in that regard, that it will never find a solution. As soon as we have identified with this character in the movie, any solution that we find, even if it's the most holy solution, it will never lead us to where we want to be, because we are already there. So, and the funny thing is, that we are already the screen. Right now, we are right now the screen. But what's happening is this presupposing is fabricating an action figure, a character, and it's being fabricated constantly. It's like on the becoming axis, constantly becoming. It's always holding a carrot in front of us, and we can become. One day I'll get the job that really makes me happy. One day I will find a teacher who really can enlighten me. One day, and then we never get there. And it's because we have identified as something whose nature is to be agitated, to be in the becoming process, because that becoming process is driven by time, and it's driven by being in the past, being in the future, and becoming something we are not to. Yeah. So I'm just checking. So there's a question here in Instagram. Who am I talking to? It's we're here at the Zoom meeting as well. So the main meeting is a Zoom meeting, and I'm also having here Instagram Live. Anyway, so yeah, that's the number one fallacy that I see. And it's so important, instead of spending all this time and energy to go into all these different techniques and paths and books and everything, it would be enough to not buy into the idea that we are one of those characters, and instead of looking from here as Benjamin and think I'm the subject and there's everything else is an object, I would go back here and see that this, what I took myself to be as a subject, is actually an object. It's part of the movie. It can be perceived. And then when I go this way, the path is direct, if it's at all, if it's a path, because the solution is right there. How much time does it take for the fish to be in water? Even if he doesn't realize he's in water, he is in water. How long does it take once he realizes, hey, I'm actually in the water? How long does it take to get there? And it doesn't take any time, because he's already there. So that's the direct path, to go back and see that. And so here's a question: how can I join your Zoom? There's a link in the bio. Under the first link, you can just join there. Anyway, so if we just put all this effort that we usually put into what's coming after the character, what he's or she is trying to achieve or do, if we put that just back and see, hold on, who's trying to do that? What is that character? And seeing that character from the formless, just the perceiving and seeing the mechanism of this running and pretending and identifying with something that is not. And it's just enough to see that mechanism. It's like, you see the mechanism and you see this happening, this phenomena, pretending and identifying. Then it's like, that's it. It's like, I give this example sometimes with the Santa Claus. So when I was young, I believed in Santa Claus, and probably many kids do that. And I find it fascinating when this stopped for me, because it stopped for me when I was in kindergarten. And I was in kindergarten, and then I saw Santa Claus came. It was, I don't know, December 6th, I guess. So Santa Claus came, and I saw it was my neighbor, one of them. There were two people, and one of them was my neighbor, and I was suspicious, and I saw, hold on, I know this guy. He's the father of my friend. And then I was suspicious, but that was not enough yet. And then I needed another experience. But this is like, catching it in the act. And then there was another experience where, my mom said that Santa Claus is, bringing by, Santa Claus is bringing by the gifts, and putting it under the Christmas tree. And then, and I saw my mom, how she was hiding and bringing out the gifts, and I saw her, I caught her again. I was again suspicious. I was like, hold on, something is not going right here. And then I saw it second time, and that was enough for me to say, hey, you know what? Santa Claus doesn't exist. He was very disappointed on some level, but I saw it's not true, and that was enough. I just saw it, this mechanism. I just saw it, and I connected the dots, and that was it. And that's exactly like this. When we see that this is, this is what is pretending to be the subject here. When we see the claim, look, you can go into very concrete things like thoughts. Like, so one of the characteristics of this hoax, in a way, is a claiming. There's a very strong claiming that's happening. For instance, there are thoughts that are happening, and this character in the movie, it claims that it's his or her thoughts. It claims that those thoughts are about her. It claims that it's responsible for the actions. It's the doer of everything, and it has to do everything with everything. And catching that. So what happens is, this is something very concrete and you can do. So usually we're in it. That means this mechanism is happening. I have thoughts like, oh, those are my thoughts. And then in my thoughts, I feel guilty for the kind of thoughts I have, or I feel I should change them, or I feel they're not appropriate, or I feel, oh, I'm thinking so many negative thoughts. I actually should think much more positive, and so on. So this is like a very simple process, a thought stream that's happening constantly. And then that mechanism that takes those thoughts to be mine, that's exactly. So the problem is not the thoughts, and the problem is not that there's a character in this movie, but the seeming suffering occurs when those thoughts are taken to be mine, and I have control over them. That's the mechanism. And when we see that mechanism, like usually, as I said, we're in it, and we cannot see, we're in the mechanism, and when we're looking from it, we're sort of caught in it. So in a way, what is required in some way is just a neutral observing, not going into judgments and comparison and going into the thought stream. Maybe that's, for many people, the number one thing. Let's say you have meditated, you have done yoga, you have done mindfulness exercise, whatever. I think the first thing that helps in a way is to be able to observe thoughts, how they just come and go, and create like a distance between thoughts and who you are. And that's the first thing. When this is happening, the thoughts are happening, and you see that they're coming and going anyway, whether you're interfering with it or not. Then the distance comes, and then it creates a lot of trust in what's already there. And then this is exactly what I mean by this. Then this one doesn't pretend no longer that this is a subject, and I'm the thinker of the thoughts, and I'm the doer of my doings. But then it sees, whoa, actually the mechanism is showing that this is just happening. It's happening without interfering. It's like, thoughts are super close to us. And another thing that's super close to us is the body, in a way. And don't we like presuppose as well that we have control over our bodies? And isn't it obvious, as soon as we examine that presupposing, we realize that actually there's no control whatsoever? Like, just look at your body. So if each of us were in control of our bodies, I think that all of us pass would pass out or die after, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 minutes latest. Because what's happening in the body, it's a very complex system. There's blood being pumped, there's cells are splitting, there is, I don't know, breathing happening, the heartbeat, there's endless functionings happening, right? And if I was responsible for it, I would speak to a friend and I would forget to pump my blood and I would just fall down. And it's so obvious, right, that this we have no control over it, and we pretend to have control. So this mechanism pretends to have control over the body in a way, for instance, saying, hey, look, I have control, and I have a 20 years spiritual experience, and I have a big spiritual ego, and so of course I know how to control my breathing, but what we do is, in that moment, maybe there's a small little sign of control and it makes us believe, oh, look, I can stop my breathing for, I don't know, 2 minutes. But when we are not focused on it and thinking about it, and we're, I don't know, walking in the forest, we're not thinking about breathing and still happening. So it's a very insane belief that we have control over the closest things that are to us. And we even think we have control over events that are happening in our lives. And when we have a great career within this movie, we feel proud, and somebody asks us, hey, how, like, they invite us for an interview and they're like, hey, how did you manage to have such a wonderful career and make millions and be so successful? People are like, oh yeah, because I did this, and that led to this. But this is just a story that's being told, and we are so obsessed with those stories that we totally forget what's actually happening. And so yeah, that's one big thing. As I said, that one of the biggest fallacies in spirituality is the wrong starting point. So here's a question. Find Your Silence is saying, so would you say that even the conscious body is an extension of the subconscious, i.e. not within control? The conscious body. So, okay, let's go to that. So usually what is believed, also presupposed in a way, is that the body has a consciousness. Even the neuroscientists, I'm not so much into the latest science, because science is also has that problem in my eyes. There's many great things science does, but science also starts with the wrong starting points a lot. So most of the studies in my eyes are also, in a way, not showing the full truth. They're partly, obviously, some of them true, but when you have done your own study, you can also stretch it in many ways. But anyway, so we presuppose that the body has a consciousness. Neuroscientists today say that's not so. And yeah, it's not so. It's more like consciousness is here and the body appears in consciousness. That's exactly part of the claiming that says, I am Benjamin, I live in this body or whatever, and my brain is conscious, and I am conscious through my body, but it's not. There's consciousness, and the only thing that's conscious is consciousness, and the body is appearing in consciousness. But what's happening is Benjamin, in this case, is claiming to be conscious, although it's not his function in a way. So, and even subconscious, I'm not even sure what that means, but in a way, so what happens is there's consciousness, which is the screen, and all the events and actions are happening in the movie. And so maybe you can rephrase your question, because I'm not quite sure what you exactly mean. Because as I said, the only thing that's conscious is consciousness. Everything else is happening in consciousness, and that's what we are. And like, look, how much are you concerned about what's happening in the movie? Because usually, like when we are in spirituality, like the first thing we usually do, because we are identified with the wrong starting point, we take ourselves to be that character in the movie. We care so much about what's going to happen in the movie. But this, what's happening in the movie, is just a play. It's it's something fabricated. It's not relevant, because in this analogy, what we are is the screen. And guess how much does the screen really care what movie is being played? It's like, if there's a comedy being showed, it will, let's say in this analogy, it will laugh, it will have a good time with that. If there's a horror movie, then it will enjoy the horror movie maybe. And if there's a drama, then it will enjoy the drama. But there's no concern at all whatsoever with what's actually happening. Seemingly so, maybe, let's say if we go to the movies and even in the movies, we may start crying, or we may start, I don't know, looking forward to seeing what's going to happen next, but never will we be obsessed with it so much as we're obsessed in this life about this dreaming, in a way. And so the problem is exactly that we are identified with this character so much that we think this is everything. And but as I said, we are the screen. So the screen is not. It may be like saying, "Oh yeah, this is a game. So who's gonna win?" Yeah, okay. But that's it. It will never be obsessed about what's going to happen. But this is happening to the action figure. It's constantly obsessed over things it has nothing to do with. And that's exactly where the suffering comes from. So here's a comment from Amoga Gastia. Is it not true that everything that is perceived is ourselves? Is it not true that everything that is perceived is ourselves? Yeah, I think we spoke about it last time. So I want to go into that again, because it's a good question. So what I'm mainly speaking about here is the process of, let's say today, like for instance, the wrong starting point, right? Meaning, what I'm saying is, so let's say this is who we are. Yeah, the screen. Then we go here to being identified, presupposed we're the character in the movie. And what we're doing here is we are going back and say, hey, look, let's examine whether this is really the case, whether our starting point is exactly that action figure or this character in the movie. And for that, it's important to say what we're not. We're not this and not that. It's like neti. We're neither this nor that. And that's why we're going back. It's like sort of saying everything that can be perceived is not who we are. We're not that. It's like imagine the screen is being identified fully with the movie. It's fully in the movie, and it has forgotten that it's the screen. Wouldn't you want to make sure or tell the screen that actually, hey, everything is cool? Like, let's say there was a crazy event happening, and it's so overwhelmed that it's good for the action figure to say, hey, hold on, actually, I'm okay on the screen. Nothing, no bomb that will go off in the movie will ever be able to touch me, so everything is cool. But then again, to your question, where is the movie happening? It's happening within the screen. So if you ultimately look at the substance of what the movie is made of, so everything that can be perceived, what is it made of? If you look and zoom into it, you would see that it's a pixel on the screen. So that's why, replying to your question, yes, on the one hand, from that perspective of saying, hey, you are the screen and that nothing else exists but the screen, the formless, that's what you are, then you could say, no, everything else doesn't exist. I would say it's the same as, this analogy with the dreaming, yeah? Say at night, Krista is dreaming at night. She's lying in her bed and she's dreaming. And then a dream world is being created, right? And so to your question, would you say that isn't that everything that's happening in the dream, so everything that's being able to perceive in the dream, isn't that ourselves? On a relative level, when you're in the dream and you see it from the outer perspective, you would say, no, that's actually just a dream world. And what I am is lying in bed and dreaming. So from that perspective, you could say that, but it's just the different levels, but those levels are often confused. And I think that's why it's so important to make that differentiation. So, because what happens is when I'm identified as an action figure, the character in the movie, and I say, hey, everything is one. It's all one. We hear this a lot in many cycles or circles. So everything is one and we're oneness. What usually happens is there are many characters in the movie and they say, hey, we're all one. I heard about this idea. It sounds so wonderful. But what hasn't been done is that step to say, hey, I'm the screen. And that's, I think it's very important. So I hope that answered your question. I get you. Okay, that's answered. And then what I meant is we usually feel a sense of conscious control when we can control things like moving our legs to walk or moving our eyes. Subconscious would mean how our heart beats without conscious control. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. There is, and this, what you say, like, let's say I'm here and I say, hey, look, I have control over my body because look, I can lift this arm, right? So I have free will, I can do whatever I want. But as I said, this is just an absurd way of claiming to have control over so many things we have nothing to do with. That there's an experiment in psychology. There have been many different experiments in that regard. And what they do is, it's about free will and the control over the body. So what they have found out is, they have put someone in front of a screen, right? And what they do is they show let's say green and red, and they tell people to either decide for green or decide for red, and then and they show different colors. But what they found out is that so what happens is they could predict. Then the experiments differ. So between 3 and 7 seconds, they could predict if somebody says, "Oh yeah, I just decided to click the green button." They could predict 3 to 7 seconds before that they will hit the green button, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. So what you call about conscious control means that something in us is claiming to say, yes, I'm going to do that, but the decision has been taken 7 seconds before. That means it's not like that we can control and then we do it, but it's more like it's being done already and maybe we can foresee what's going to happen. It's like more like a vision, but it has nothing to do with control, and that's proven in those experiments as well. Anyway, so first fallacy again is the wrong starting point. We spoke about this in detail now. Another one is, and let's go into that. Another one is, so we start on the wrong starting point. We take ourselves to be a character, long-lasting, independent, separate entity. And then what happens is, we have heard of this thing, liberation, and no suffering and everything. And then what happens is, because we have identified as this character in the movie, we try to become the screen as the movie character. And that's like a hope that, as I said, many people in spirituality, they have, and they try so hard to become. It's like, imagine an action figure is trying to get out of the movie and becoming the screen. It's not possible. But it's also, the funny thing, it's not possible. You can try hard, you can be the best in breathing, in pranayama, in asanas, in vasanas, and whatever there is. But it will never be able to do that. And you don't have to do that. It's like, look, it's like we buy into the idea that, as I said, that we are this character in the movie, that we are this object, but we pretend to be a subject. And then as that object, we try to become the subject, which will never be possible. And we put so much energy into that. So let's say, for instance, yeah, I mean, like, you know, we try to escape the movie and try to become something that we can never become, and how successful will that be? And something in us pretends one day we will do it because other people have done it as well, but it will never happen. Okay, here's an interesting comment. But we need to be an actor and get involved in this world. Okay, so that's an interesting point. So because that's exactly what usually happens is the following, right? So let's say there's those two levels. One is the screen, and one is the action figure, the actor, the character in the movie. So what happens is, so those are two elements or two levels that are happening anyway. And what we usually do is we are so identified with an action figure, and we pretend, we claim and say, hey, look, if I gave up being this action figure, the action figure would just collapse. It would die. It wouldn't exist anymore. But that's part of the fallacy, because what I'm saying is that the movie is scripted and it's directed and it's happening anyway. And the screen is there anyway. But we have never been the actor in this movie. That's why once it stops, once, let's say, we decide to let go of this, nothing changes at all, because the action figure, the actor, is scripted and is directed by the movie, by the director, by the writer, and it's happening. But what is stopping is the story that it's me doing all of this stuff. That's the only change. And you know, it's like how I said last time, it's really interesting. We believe we have free will. Then at some point we realize, hey, actually, you know, I realized actually there's no free will. But then to do the final step, we were like, oh, hold on. But if I stop, if I let go fully, then everything will collapse and nothing will be the same as before. I would just not do anything. But that's exactly the point, that it won't change, because the assumption is we used to have control. Now I give up control and everything will collapse. But that's the wrong assumption, because what happens is everything is sort of on autopilot. The action figure is working on its own. It's like on autopilot. So this is happening. The only thing that we did was we told ourselves a story. There was a claiming that we are doing all those things. We are the doer, we're the thinker, and that will stop. So that's what's causing the suffering, and that's the only thing that stops. Nothing else stops, and I think that's quite a leap, you know, and the great news actually. So there's comments from Priscilla. We don't have free will except the way we perceive. Our ego is too conditioned to have any control. Your higher true self doesn't need it. Will is about the ego only. Exactly. So that's exactly what I said. And yeah, like Priscilla is saying, you know, in a way, do we have control over the events that are happening, you know, and the actions that are happening and thoughts and feelings? No. But in a way, if at all there is some kind of control, and that's a funny thing, you know, it's hard to speak about it, but in a funny way, when we realize those mechanisms and what's happening, it's the way we may not be able to change the events, but how we cope with them. And that's a big relief, how we perceive them. And that can change everything, you know. So let's say somebody is on the street and they say, hey, you're an idiot. And we are not able to change that somebody calls us an idiot. But what we are able to do is, whether there is some kind of identification with this body mind, be like, oh my God, I'm called an idiot. What do I do? How do I get out of this? Or whether we see, you know, from the screen perspective, and we see, okay, in the movie there's happening something, someone is calling someone else an idiot, but we know that we have nothing to do with that individual, and that's the solution is right there. So that changes everything. Exactly. So here's another comment, but we need to, okay, is there really such a thing as a subjective I? Is there really such a thing as a subjective I? I mean, the I that we usually say I is usually like in a day-to-day, it's like usually from the body-mind, right? Oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And we don't have to change that language because, yeah, it's just another conditioning. But I mean, in some, some people say, yeah, there's the ultimate I, the subject, the ultimate subject I spoke of it last time. There's the separation, right? Separation. There's oneness, and there's awareness. And let's say you can also say there's I am this body, I am, and I. So I am this body is the separation, I am is the oneness, and I is the awareness. But this is not the last thing, because all of this is happening basically in what is. That's even a level beyond that. So on some degree you can say I is the ultimate subject, the ultimate witness, but there's even something beyond that, because that's already the first, they say the first sound, or the first materialistic thing is sound and light. That's like the most subtle form of materialism, and that's coming. But even awareness is not the ultimate, because there's something where in which awareness, but that goes in a very, very narrow thing. Anyway, so coming back, and yeah, let me know if you have any other questions. I'm always happy to take them. So becoming the screen as the action figure, we spoke about that. And that's exactly like, let's take some examples. So I am trying to, so I want to speak about the becoming and the being. That's the symbolism of the cross. So there's, on the horizontal axis, there's the becoming, and on the vertical is the being. So in a way, the movie is happening on this level and the screen is the vertical. So what we try to do is, the action figure is fully immersed and identified in the becoming. That's sort of where it gets its, motivation and drive. It's only driven, it needs purpose, it needs goals, it needs even suffering to some degree, and it constantly needs validation, because it's a fabrication, it's a figment. It doesn't have an existence on its own, and that's why it constantly needs those things. And that's in the becoming process, right? It would never rest still and be like, oh my God, I'm fine with what is. And that's important to realize, to understand that these are two different dynamics that we are aware of, because mostly we are fully identified with the becoming, and we don't realize that in a way that that these are two different dynamics that we can listen to. When we're able to see that mostly we're auto-driven by the becoming process, and we're like, it's almost like the becoming process has become our guru, and it's like our guru, and we're listening, we put all our trust into this becoming process, and we have forgotten to listen to the being, to the vertical. And when we're able to shift the gears in a way to see that what we are is in the being, is in the timeless, in that compassion, in this love, then, and we see that it's always available, and that's what we are, what we truly are, then we are able to see that not, what we usually do is, on the becoming, we think that one day I will be the being, what I am already. But it's like this, it's always so. But we're so busy on this realm that we completely forget about that. But it takes like no time to be here what we already are. And I think this is also can be a big relief, because this journey that you may think you're on here in spirituality, is not something that ends with an event or something to attain. It's more like, if so at all, then you will realize that there's nothing to attain because you are already it. And once you see that, you will realize that nothing has ever changed, that it was just everything else on the horizontal, on the becoming process, was just a fabrication that came from moment to moment. And yeah, I think that's an extremely important thing to see. Yeah. So here's a question. Is there, from Amogastaya, is there a becoming without the being? I would say no, because it's also important to see that the becoming is dependent on the being. It's like this analogy, when we come back to the movie and screen, the becoming is everything that's happening in the screen. Becoming needs time. A thought to be expressed needs time. It can only exist in time. Being is formless and there's no time. It's timeless. That's what we are. Time and the becoming can only exist when it has the background or its substance made of no form, no becoming, no agitation, like stillness, the pure stillness. It needs that contrast. It's like how I say, if your tongue was made of salt and I gave you salt, what would it taste like? It wouldn't taste like anything because it always needs that contrast. Here's another question. Intoxication of, is suffering wrong? Can we get used to it and be happy? Who's the one that suffers? There's another one. Okay, let's go step by step. So, is suffering wrong? No, for sure not. Suffering is not wrong. Wrong always means to whom? To whom is suffering wrong? No, it's not. Can we get used to it and be happy? Okay, that's an interesting point. So let's go into that. So I would say that the action figure, the character in the movie, it encounters suffering. It's sort of, suffering is part of this action figure. So it's not wrong at all. It's just part of the script. And can we get used to it and be happy? I would say no, because the action figure is used to it anyway, but it's not us who is used to it. And so the thing is here is that confusion of what we are and what this action figure is. And it's a very tricky thing to do, but I think that's where the key is. Let's go into this because I think it's very important. Is suffering wrong? No. Where is suffering happening? It's happening in the movie. It's happening. The action figure is suffering. But guess what? You would not be concerned about that the action figure is suffering at all if you see that you are not that action figure. Then you wouldn't even be concerned whether or not the action figure is suffering. And that's the key. Because it's so hard for us to take these two apart, because we are so identified with the action figure that, let's say, this is who we are, this is the action figure, we're like this. And then that's because, and it's only seemingly happening, it will never become real, but we're so concerned with the action figure, we're like, oh my God, what will it do? Will it survive? Will it be healthy? Will it have enough money? We're so concerned with the action figure because we're fully identified with it. That's why we have questions like, can we get used to it? Will it be fine? No. And it doesn't have to be, because when we see that these two are not belonging together, we're not concerned about the action figure. The action figure will suffer. It will do its thing, the story and everything, and suffering is happening, but it's not us that is suffering, and that's the key. That's the key distinction, and it's very hard for this, identification to see that and to experience it. But that's what's happening constantly. And who is the one that suffers? That's a good question as well, because as I just said, there's suffering happening, but no one who suffers, because the action figure is not even real. It doesn't have an existence on its own. It's happening. The only reality it has is the one it gets from the screen. That's the only reality it has. But it's like the same as if you, okay, let's take this example of the analogy. The dreamer who lies on its bed and the dreaming. So if you think, let's say in the dream, you are suffering. Let's say your girlfriend left you. And then you're suffering. So who is suffering? It's the dreamt person, the dreamt object in the dream is suffering. And then could it get used to it and be happy? I mean, to some degree, yes. Within the dream, yes. But this is not happiness. This is just some relative thing. But who's the one that suffers? It's obviously not the one sleeping in the bed, but it's the dreamt object in the dream. But how relevant is it? Because it's appearing and disappearing, within that dream. And the one who's lying in bed is not concerned about it. Maybe for that moment when it happens, when it becomes aware of it, yes, but it knows it has nothing to do with it. And that's exactly the key to all of this, is to realize that freedom, the freedom that we're speaking about here, is not to be found within that movie, but it's to be found and not to be found within the dream, but it's only to be found in the screen and the person who's lying in her bed. That's where the only true freedom and happiness is. And that's the good thing, is obviously that's who we are. But as I said at the beginning, the biggest fallacy is that we presuppose we are the screen, we are the person lying in bed, and we presuppose we're that other thing. But it's just an appearance, we have nothing to do with that. And that's the beauty. So here's 2 more points, and then I think that's it. So, but to see something other like actor is duality. What is happiness? So, but to see something other, so let's say to see some other actor is duality. Yeah, so, but look, there's a big difference. When we are seemingly identified as one of the actors, then, and take it seriously, then what happens is all the relationships are very mechanical, from object to object. It's never really it never goes deep to the true nature of what we are. And that's duality. That's good, that's bad. This is, good, bad, all the duality that's happening. But the thing is, we have nothing to do with that. It's just the play. It's like, Maya, the illusion. And when we see it from the perspective of the screen, we see the nature of it. But when we see it from the perspective of being in there, then it's suffering, and it's really hard. And here's the last question: what is happiness? There's happiness that the action figure or the character in the movie can perceive, or the person in the dream. And there's certain degrees of happiness, and it's always striving to be happy in a way, and trying to avoid the bad things and attracting the good things. But this is not the happiness we're speaking about. Instead of happiness, let's take peace. The peace that we're looking for is not the peace of mind that you get, when your mind is a bit calm, and for a few seconds or a few minutes your mind is calm, like, oh, hopefully it will stay like this. That's not the peace what we're talking about here. That peace what we're talking about, the happiness is an attribute of the screen. It's an inherent attribute that you don't have to attain, you don't have to practice, you don't have to do anything for it, because it's our true nature. And that's a happiness that doesn't know sadness. Usually in the world of duality, you have happiness, sadness, you have success, failure, you have all the opposites. But what we're talking about, the happiness or the peace, it doesn't know opposites, because it's outside of duality. And that's what's always available to us right now, at any stage, at any time. It requires no time to get there. It doesn't require any courses you have to take. It doesn't require anything. It's just like, yeah, what if at all, you know, it helps to have those reminders, to have some kind of, to seeing the mechanism, to see what's happening. And that's, yeah, I think that's of value to some degree to the action figure at some point. But what we are doesn't need anything. But what's also important is, you know, I want to mention that as the last thing is, it wouldn't be okay to say, hey, you know what, I'm the action figure Benjamin. Oh, everything is fine, nothing needs to be done, so that's it. When I hear this as the action figure, I would just, you know, go on the, I don't know, I would think I can, if I think I have the control, I could just rest and not do anything, but that doesn't work, you know, it's a level confusion. There's the action figure and there's the screen. And the screen obviously doesn't have to do anything just by being accepted. There's also this thing of acceptance, tolerance, you know, grateful and all these things, you know, when the action figure tries to do all those things, it seems to be a bit, I don't know, there's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't have to do that because it's not getting anywhere with that, because it's attributes of the screen of what we are. And if the action figure tries to do it, it doesn't feel whole, it feels wrong. And I see that a lot, no? Like when we see spiritual practices, you know, they seem to lead us to the screen, but actually what they fool us in a way, those exercises. And that's why I think it's so important to speak about that and point it out, that there's no need, like, you know, the action figure is not holy. And we try to become holy as what we are, but that's not who we are. Like what we are is, in a way, if you want, holy. It is everything that you ever wanted. And the action figure will never be able to get. But that's it, it's already there. So anyway, that's it for today. So for those of you who are new to this, we do this every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Swiss time. And yeah, that's it. So thank you very much, and all the best. Bye bye.